don't think that, especially with residences that close to it, that they would necessarily want lights directly across the street that could create glare and other problems for them.
Okay. And lastly, in closing, I know that working on the Parks Board, anytime you create traffic in an area, like we did with the Frisbee Golf at Coggeshall, it drives out people that you might not want there. People who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, they don't want a lot of people around. They don't want people seeing them. So, strange as it sounds, sometimes getting more people in an area actually drives the people away that you don't want there. So thank you for your efforts, and I hope this does go through because I think it'll be an exciting thing for the neighborhood. So.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to kind of follow along with what Councilor Tran mentioned a few moments ago. As of right now, who owns that property, Larry?
It's a city property, and the
city of
Parks
Fitchburg.
Board has jurisdiction over it.
Okay. After this construction and so forth is done, who will own the property?
It will remain unchanged in terms of
Unchanged.
ownership.
Thank you.
Councilor Green.
I've been on board with this project since the initial community meeting that we had, and we walked down to this area, and I will say, and this is no judgment or anything, but as that park sits right now today, it's a disgrace. And I do wholeheartedly feel bad for the neighbors that have had to put up with the park looking like that for, I believe, probably the past 8 years at least. So I think anything that we can do to that area that would improve it is a win-win for the city. And again, in conceptual thought at the very beginning, it was going to be, very low maintenance because we did realize that there's 41 other parks in town, 42 probably, and that the DPW doesn't have the staff to take care of it. So I know that that's all in consideration, along with, cutting down the bushes and the overgrowth that are happening even on the street side of the park is all overgrown. So anything that we can do to curb the activity that's happening there, probably as we speak, would be beneficial. And with the 2 new residential homes that are in that area with children, I think that we could definitely pull from, not only First, Second, Third, Middle Street, but even maybe up even further, or even across the street. Maybe some kids from Granite Street, if they could safely cross the street, could get down to this park and utilize it. So I'm in favor of this park 110% because I think it's a step in the right direction. Thank you.
There have been legitimate concerns raised about this park from a practical standpoint. We have 33 parks currently, 427 acres. And there are parks throughout the city that are not properly maintained. And it's not because the DPW doesn't try, it's because they have 4 people for 427 acres. So the legitimate concern raised a few weeks ago was, is this going to be another park that's going to look beautiful in year 1 and 2, and then by year 5 it's going to look like crap? And obviously members of the community probably could step up and help out with that, but the reality of the situation is there are still many parks in the city that are not maintained. Boylston Park, which is practically not a park anymore, the neighbors in that area on Boylston Street are in uproar over that park. Not so much because it's not being utilized, but because it used to be a nice-looking park, and then over time started to degrade. The equipment there is a hazard to children. The equipment there needs to be removed. The equipment there is an eyesore, and it's not properly maintained. And the neighbors in that area are furious about it. They are telling me they want the city to sell it, not to have it be a park again. So that's why I'm concerned about this, not because of the legitimacy or the need, but because of past experience. And I don't want anybody to construe that I'm against this petition, but I believe any concerns that I have and others have are legitimate concerns based on history. And even though we're being told it's not high maintenance, we still don't know what the designs are yet. And one counselor said, well, the worst case scenario is it'll just be what it is now. Well, there are people that have been calling me the last few weeks. Granted, they're not in that neighborhood, but they're Fitchburg residents who have a larger issue with this. And that is, I had one gentleman call me and say, why do we not have $250,000 for road repairs, but we have $250,000 for a park when we already have 33 of them? And I had no real answer for him because it's a legitimate question from a taxpayer. I don't have an answer for him. It was frustrating for him and others who have called me to hear about the money available for this when they're driving through a minefield on their own road. So there's a concern there. But I get the residents in that neighborhood want it. I get that it's an eyesore right now, so you're caught between a rock and a hard place. If we leave it the way it is, it's going to be a drain on the values. It's going to be a drain on the community. But at the same time, my concern is 5 or 6 or 7 years down the road. What will that park look like in a decade? I don't want it to look like Boylston Street. I don't want it to look like Bucky Richards Park. I had 2 people call me last week. It looks terrible. I drove down there. It looks terrible. So I forgive me for being a little skeptical as to the maintenance. The concept is great. The need is there. But, I mean, with 33 parks already and 400 plus acres for 4 people, I'm sure community members can step up here and there, but we're talking 10, 15 years down the road on a regular basis. To me, to get DPW to cut the grass on Boylston Street was a task in of itself because it's not a priority for them, because it's not used. This obviously will be used originally, and I hope it's used for a very long time. So I'm conflicted at the moment on this, not because it's not needed, but because of all the other problems we've had. And I've heard councilors before talk ad nauseum of accepting parks when we don't have the resources to maintain the ones we already have. So I've had members of the community within the neighborhood voice support for it. I've had members in the community outside of the neighborhood, for the most part, say they're against it. So I take that for what it's worth. Councilor Tran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope people understand that this money is not coming out from our budget, because it is. I wouldn't be in support of this. I would rather use the money to repair some of our roads and streets. I think it's great that the neighbors are here tonight with us, listening and participating in the meeting. If we do get this grant and the proposal does go forward with the project, I hope that the people stay in touch with the project, get involved, and if there isn't a neighborhood watch group in that part of the city already, please come together and create one, and keep an eye on the park and help the city maintain the park and inform the officials in the city if you see any problems. And this is a way where we can get the people from the community engaged and help us maintain the parks going forward. Thank you.
Council Boschman.
All right, a piece of paper you back, but he says here you got a plan here. And it shows trees, shrubbery, long tables and everything. And then we have approximately 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 6 houses, probably no more than 300-400 feet away from the park. You see the houses? There's one on by Railroad Street right on the corner. Right down your right-hand side, you're facing, if you look at it this way. Now again, I'm not saying that I'm against the park. I'm not saying that. But what happens, like all parks, and we all seem to forget, when we are young, we do stupid things, and we play there after hours. And we party after hours when we're young. And if we're going to have a gate and they can climb over and they're in there drinking their beer and that, my concern is these neighbors, 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 6 neighbors, 8 neighbors right in that vicinity, right against the park. And how do they actually feel with the park being right there? It's great that we have the guy down the street here supporting the park. I would support the Park Hill. I'm supporting the park. I support Park Hill Park. But I don't live right there when the kids hop over the fence and they're playing basketball or they're out there swearing and drinking beer or doing what they do, what kids do. You know, and I know what happens sometime, I believe it happens in Park Hill, where the neighbors call up because they hear kids in the park. That's my concern. And if it's gonna look like this, we are hiding. It's not wide open, it's not gonna be able, where the police cannot see. That's the only thing I'm worried about. I'm all in favor if it's gonna beautify the area, but I'm worried about the 6 or 8 houses that are actually abutting the park, that's gonna have to live with it 365 days a year. That's who I am concerned about.
I hear you, Counselor.
The $250 for this grant, you know, piggybacking on what I said earlier, while it is state funding, what I try to explain to some of these residents is the city is not soliciting requests. The city is not sitting there going, oh, well, the state's got a bucket of money for street and road repairs sitting here, but we're not going after that. We're going after park money. I'm trying to explain to people that this is the state of Massachusetts that just comes forward and says, hey, you know what? We woke up today and we want to spend $10 million on parks in the state of Massachusetts. Who's in? So we go for it. If they said $20 million or $10 million for roads, we'd go in on that too. But that's called Chapter 90 money through the budget process. It's a different kind of money. So while I understand the residents' issues about why do we have $250 for this but not $250 for that, it's not what people think. It's not like the state is giving us a laundry list of projects that we can pick from and we bypass all of these other issues and we just go to the parks section. This is what the state has presented to us, and we have a need for it, so we went and we're trying to get it. I look at that area right now, and it is an eyesore. It's a concern. This design, I'm going based on this design, and I take a lot of stock in what Mr. Laxo says. He assures us that it'll be low maintenance. Mr. Casassa said the same thing. I look at the fact that it's an eyesore now depressing the values in that neighborhood. And I ask myself, that park is even worse looking than Boylston Street. And I think to myself how angry the neighbors are over there about how it looks. They're not saying they don't want to park there. They want something there, because right now it's sitting there collecting dust. And that's what this area is doing. So not directed at you, Council, I'm just spitballing here, but while I'm torn between the maintenance side of it, we've been given assurances by the DPW that the maintenance aspect of this is extremely minimal. And by minimal, I'm hoping that maybe once or twice a year, the DPW can send someone over there and take care of it. It's not something that's going to require every 2 weeks' worth of work. Number two is, if we don't do this and we don't get this money, it's going to sit there still and look like a hole in the ground. And that will also depress people in that neighborhood, because it will still attract vagrants near the railroad tracks. The way it is right now, it's not working for people. So if we have this opportunity, which is not etched in stone yet, we may not get this money. I feel the city, it's in the best interest of the city to go forward with this. We've done our due diligence. We've done our homework. If this project stated there's going to be a lot of grass, a lot of shrubbery, a lot of taxing issues, I would be flat against this. But the fact that it's very low maintenance and the fact that it looks like hell right now, I feel inclined to support it, because I see nothing but an upside from this. It'll beautify the neighborhood. It'll increase the property values in that neighborhood, I'm hoping, because what's going on right now isn't helping. And the maintenance is minimal. So I have confidence in Mr. Laxo's testimony, because he's not afraid to tell us the real truth. He's told us before, this isn't going to work. And I put a lot of stock in what he says from his department's ability to take care of this. President Hay, you had your hand up?
Pretty much reiterating what you just said, Mr. Chairman, is that I want to make sure that people understand the $250,000 is specifically to build a park. People can complain about the roads in Fitchburg, but it's not as if we can say, well, we're going to take the $250 and we're going to do something else with it. In reality, what I love that the state just, every time they wanted to give money away, just gave us the lump of money and let the city of Fitchburg decide what was best for us and what we wanted to do with it. Absolutely. That's not how it works. They tell you very specifically, here's money for parks, here's money for this, here's money for that, and if you want it, you take it. So people who are complaining about roads, this money is totally independent and separate of that. I think that this committee, that at its last meeting and at tonight's meeting, has raised legitimate questions and legitimate concerns regarding the safety and the police presence, regarding the DPW and what's going to have to happen there. But I think those get offset by the fact that the neighbors are indicating that they strongly want this, and they'll be active and involved, and you go for it. And we hope that it works out, and we hope that it's an improvement for your neighborhood. We hope that it improves your values in your houses in the neighborhood, and hope that it gives the kids someplace good to go. But I will say, Councilor Tran talked about it. Part of the burden's going to be on you guys. When Councilor Boschman talked about the people who are abutters, I saw hands out there. I know there are abutters who are supporting this. But by the same token, I lived right beside Goodrich Street Playground, and I can tell you there were nights, not my mother because we were all out there, but there were other people in the neighborhood who weren't happy at 8 o'clock at night when there was still basketball games going on and stuff going on. But, you need to deal with that as neighborhoods and as a community. So ultimately, although I think we raised good questions and showed due diligence in with issues that concerned us, I think it's something that we support, or at least I will support.
I have a real quick question, if I could.
The chair would, if he so chooses.
Would you like to ask your question, sir?
Yes, please.
Do you mind just stating your name for the record, please?
Yeah, my name is Robert Pooler. I live on Railroad Street. Okay, my question is, there's a little playground area behind the apartments over off of Middle Street. Okay, in that playground, there's a sign that says something about adopt a park. Okay. Who runs that type of a program? Because I called that number, the number that's on that sign several times, and never got a response on it. Because I wanted to take part in helping maintain that park.
Is that part?
That was actually a Fund Fitchburg effort. It was coordinated by Mark. I can research that. I wasn't aware that the numbers on the sign no longer work. So I can look into that.
I got a voicemail. I never did get any kind of a response from it.
So I have.
Numbers may have changed.
That was supposed to be maintained by Fitchburg Green. It
Okay.
was supposed to be maintained by Fitchburg Green. There was a playground there before. There were swings in it, sandbox, and the water fountain. Back probably in 1950.
Okay, my question, I guess, then is why could we not go and work hand in hand with parks and do an adopt a park program in that particular area?
I think what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to coordinate with the Recreation Department and the Parks Board to find a solution to your inquiry, sir, because it's a valid concern. When you call the number, there should be someone on the other end to pick it up. So, Director of Public Health, Mr. Curry, I know Mr. Raschudi's here, who's the chairman of the Parks Board, as well as Mr. McGrath, who's on the Parks Board. They'll look into this matter and reach out to you because, by all means, if we have abilities to adopt parks and have people themselves take care of it, we'd be stupid not to take that help. We have 16315 and 15815 before you for
Move that 16315 and 15815 be adopted.
Second.
motion made and seconded to approve 16315 and 15815. Speaking on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Casassa. 19215, an order that the City of Fitchburg hereby approves the expenditure of funds from the Department of Housing and Urban Development for the HUD Lead Hazard Control Grant in the approximate amount of $3,231,610 for the purposes of said grant. Mr. Casassa.
Thank you, councilors.
And we have Ms. Liz Murphy
I'm
here.
going to ask Liz Murphy and Mark Doan from the CDC to join me, if that's okay. Well, the Board of Health is also involved in this project, so Mr. Curry may want to offer comment as well. What is before you tonight is an appropriation request for an award of $3.2 million from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. They have been running a lead-based paint hazard control grant program for a number of years. Because the city of Fitchburg has a much higher percentage of older housing stock than the rest of the Commonwealth, Fitchburg has been identified, as you probably many of you know already, as having a very high incidence of lead paint. In addition to adding cost to the responsibility for property owners who have lead paint in their homes, it also creates a liability for those owners in the case of lead poisoning. And we do, in fact, have one of the higher numbers of incidences of lead poisoning in the state as well. For that reason, we met with the Twin Cities CDC and with a couple of area agencies and communities and took a hard look at this round of funding by HUD, which we knew was a very competitive grant program, and we really weren't sure if we'd be able. We actually didn't expect to get an award of funds under this program, to be honest. But our sense was that there was a significant need, and it was worth a shot at putting it together. So Ms. Murphy and the staff at the CDC and at MOC worked pretty hard on this. And they also worked with a couple of other member communities that had high enough statistical incidences with lead paint for us to put together a competitive grant program to HUD. And we got them to agree to act as partners under this grant program. They put the application together, and much to our surprise, Fitchburg was awarded a grant under this very competitive program. So other than that general overview, the people who really have some background knowledge are Liz and Mark and others who are here tonight. They also prepared a kind of a frequently asked question handout for you that I think addresses most of the questions and concerns we thought you might have about this grant. Thank you.
I'll start it off. What are the costs to the city? Bullet number 2 says that as the city will be hiring a one full-time lead program manager to manage the program, there will be associated fringe benefit and OPEB costs for this position. Working with the city auditor, we have set aside an estimated 35% of the manager's salary to cover these costs under the grant. Although fringe benefits will be covered by the grant, there could be a cost to the city at the end of the 3-year grant period in the event that the program manager hired does not find other employment and is eligible to receive unemployment compensation for a period of time. So my question with that is, when we talk about hiring someone new for a grant program, that grant is covering this person's health care and pension costs for the first 3 years? For the 3 years of the grant?
For the 3 years of the grant.
What happens to this person once the grant runs out?
Well, the person is being hired with the knowledge that it is a 3-year grant, so that they know that they have a 3-year position. That's being disclosed to them as part of the solicitation. If in 3 years there is another round of funding available and we choose to apply for it, then we might be able to continue their employment. But it enables that person sufficient time to plan, if they don't have other alternate employment opportunities, to look for other jobs in the final months of the position.
So my concern is, let's assume that 3 years runs out, we don't get another grant. Do we have any idea if this employee would be a union employee?
He would probably be eligible, or she would probably be eligible for membership in the union.
I'm going somewhere with this. I'm asking because where I'm going with this, Larry, is after the 3 years, the grant expires, let's say. If the employee is in that type of a situation, I feel as if we're going to have them still on the rolls after the 3 years, and we're just going to have to find something else for them to do. Is that not a correct that not a possibility?
They could be laid off, so
Okay.
we would incur unemployment.
Okay. Mr. President, is there a problem?
No, I've got a question. I don't understand why the person has to be a city employee.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. I just see you fidgeting over that.
Yes, that's what I want to get to.
Okay. I'm asking because we have more than $250 million in unfunded liabilities right now. So any new hire needs to be scrutinized, especially if it's under the umbrella of a grant. Because when the grant is sold to the council for new hires, don't worry, the grant's covering the costs. I'd like to know what happens after the grant's gone. And it is possible there could be a layoff. It's also possible there couldn't be. I'm just concerned about the city taking on the costs beyond this grant award. That's all I'm concerned about. And as President Hay was going to talk about, it's not a bad segue into my next part. Is there anything precluding us from having a contracted position for this? I know there's 2 part-time contracted positions, and then there's a full-time position. Why can't that full-time position also be contracted? Considering it's only a 3-year deal, I mean, that's why. If that were the case, I wouldn't even bat an eye over this.
Well, the standard that we have to apply and that the IRS would apply isn't necessarily the length of employment, but rather the nature of the job. And what we tried to do consciously going into this was to say, let's make sure that we hire consultants or contractors to do as much of the work as possible. And, of course, there are other employees who are being subsidized, but through other agencies in this grant, the partner agencies, so that's not a liability to the city. But the bottom line is the person who gets hired as the project manager is responsible for coordinating a $3 million grant, working with a number of agencies and working with many city employees. It's not feasible to have this person do that without requiring that they work full-time and that they have regular office hours with the city, with a computer and a phone. You can't legally hire someone like that and call them a consultant without violating those rules. So our understanding is that we have to have one employee for this $3 million grant, but that we are conscious that if we say that we have funding for 3 years for the position, I don't anticipate that would be a problem if at the end of 3 years we had to lay that person off, other than the potential that if they didn't find a job in advance of that and they applied for unemployment compensation, that wouldn't be something we could get the grant to reimburse for. So that was the reason we identified that. But getting somebody to run this program and having them operate remotely, there'd be no basis for them to do the job. We'd have to hire an employee for this job.
I just want to make sure that once the grant's gone, the employee's gone. That's all I'd like to know. Maybe no one can tell me that right now, but for some reason there's a little birdie in my ear saying that person will still be here. And when it says it covers fringe benefits, that's the current year costs, right? What's the vesting for an employee? I mean, 3 years is not enough to be vested in the health care and the pension system, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's at least 10 years at age 55 or 20 years for retirement.
Okay. President Hay?
When we built the high school, did we have a clerk of the works?
Yes.
Was the clerk of the works a city employee?
No, it was.
Bang, that's the answer, thank you. This person does not have to be a city employee. And I am opposed to hiring more city employees. You hire somebody and you pay them for the project. And at the end of the project, they're done. And if you want history to teach you a lesson, just look at the city of Fitchburg and how many people are still on our payroll who came on to do a project. I think this is something that's needed. I think it's great that we've got this money, but I am adamantly opposed to making an individual a city employee so that we can get this project done. It doesn't have to happen. Thank you.
Councilor Green?
My question would be about the partnership that we would have with the communities of Athol, Gardner, and Clinton. Does that mean that we're taking care of their lead paint problem as well with our one full-time city employee that works for Fitchburg, but we're servicing Athol, Gardner, and Clinton?
They would be coordinating with those communities, and I'll defer to Liz or Mark if they want to.
Right. The program manager would oversee the entire program, and those communities would be part of the program. But we're trying to be mindful of the fact that Fitchburg having the higher number of units and the higher population would require a lot of attention to Fitchburg, and that's why we partnered with the Montechusett Public Health Network to work more directly in those areas with that agency, and then some other staff would work more in Fitchburg. So, but the program manager would oversee the entire program, so that does mean coordinating with the other communities.
And what type of a person is the lead program manager? I mean, who is that person? Is it a contractor? Is it a commissioner? Who is that person?
It's somebody that would have this. They do have to have lead experience, so they couldn't be green in that area, but they have to have program administration experience. They need to be able to manage a program, and in this case, it's not just managing; it's designing a program. So there needs to be some skill and experience there.
And does Fitchburg currently have? Do we currently offer? Is it lead paint mitigation? What is it called when we have to go in and remove? De-leading. Okay. We run into this a lot in our NICE committee that sometimes holds us up with lead and asbestos and everything. So do we currently have a person that de-leads?
We do have a homeowner rehab program, and that is at times part of the program, but the funding, as you might know, has been cut quite significantly over the last 5 or so years. Our construction manager oversees that, but all of the work that's actually done is done with contractors. So we don't have people in there actually doing the de-leading. We have somebody that would write a specification for de-leading and then put that project out to bid.
Boy, I'm almost afraid then to ask about that process going out to bid. Oh God, scares me. Because again, I see that you say that projects funded by the grant will provide opportunities for local contractors who will bid on the work. So again, here's the question: is because we have lots of units and we have lots of property owners that own lots of units, are all of those projects going to have to go through procurement?
No. Fortunately, Counselor, and this is really a cost benefit to the owner, and it's reduces a burden for the city. The way we structure the program, the contract is between the homeowner and the contractor. So we assist the homeowner in getting licensed, insured contractors to bid on the work, and then the owner selects the contractor and enters into a contract, and we provide guidance and oversight, but we don't do the selection. Therefore, it's not a public bid. It's a private bid process between the owner and the contractor. So therefore, we don't have to go through the state procurement process or the city's purchasing department to be able to select contractors under this.
All right, and again, $3 million over 3 years, so $1 million a year. How many properties or how many homeowners does that look like it would be serving, roughly?
We project between 130 and 140 units over the 3-year period. 130 to 140 units over the 3-year period.
Okay, total.
Yes.
Okay, because is that expensive to de-lead property?
Very much so, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just one other thing from me. I don't want, I feel like I have to say this every meeting, I don't want it to be construed that I'm against the program or against the grant itself. I'm a forward-looking person because we have debt that we're never going to be able to pay back. And I don't want to be part of adding on to it. So while President Hay has a legitimate concern about having it be a contractor only, my main concern is whether it's contract or full-time, I want a stipulation that says that when the grant's gone, you're gone. I don't want them staying around for 15 more years because then it's our cost, no longer the feds. I want the feds to pay for this. So is there a way that we can have in this hire a contractual stipulation that says you are employed as long as the grant is alive?
I don't see any reason why we can't hire, and we intend to hire this position under that condition. We intend to advertise the position as a 3-year position. So there's no denying after the fact that this was intended to be a 3-year position. The funding's available for 3 years. It's being disclosed up front to the person who gets hired. There shouldn't be any surprises.
Now,
as far as that's
you
concerned.
probably can't answer this. Your superior could. If the chief executive officer in 3 or 4 years wanted to keep this person, they could, right? Under the city's dime.
There may be, it could transition into the budget that
Right.
may go before would go before the city council.
So I just want it clear that we have some kind of stopgap measure here where if that position goes beyond the life of the grant because the chief executive, whoever that is at the time, puts in his or her budget that this person's transitioning to another role, then it would be the city council's responsibility at that point to say, not happening. And I hope that happens if we remember it that far out, because I don't remember what I did last week. So, I mean, we got to keep tabs on that. But again, I am okay with this as long as the terms are ending with the grant. That's all. So,
And just to further support that, at the end of 3 years, the money to do the lead abatement work goes away.
right.
So the utility of having that person goes away as well to do that work. So if that person wanted to find a job with the city, they'd have to apply for another opening for a different type of position because we would no longer have a lead paint program manager.
Okay. Councilor Tran.
Larry, there's 5 partners in this initiative, and including 3 other communities. Who is the lead agency? Is that us?
That would be the city,
And
yes.
which department would be overseeing
It would be my department.
your department? And who within your department is going to provide all the oversight?
Liz Murphy,
Liz.
the Director of Housing.
Congratulations, Liz.
Thank you.
More work. What are the qualifications for one to be eligible for de-leading under this program?
Either the owner has to earn less than 80% of median income, which is the same standard as we normally have for the CDBG program, and 80% of median income is a level that covers a full half, or a little bit more than half of the city's population. It was mentioned that for a family of 4, the level was, that's not on the sheet anymore. Level was about 65,000.
65,000, yeah.
So it really will reach down to working-class families who own their own homes, who really want to deal with this problem, but who can't get financing or can't afford to do it on their own. It also will be available, but there'll be a co-payment requirement for investor owners. And in that case, the eligibility is that the tenants have to meet that requirement of the 80%.
A large portion of this grant is going to go towards hiring a lead program manager and contractors and so forth. Any amount of this money can be used to pay for city employees providing oversight and work under this program, for example, Liz?
Can you bill your hours to the admin portion?
Yes, we budgeted roughly 10%
Okay.
for my salary and 5% for our program manager assistant, who assistant would be doing fund requests and some admin work for us, a very small amount of her time. I believe that's it for city staff.
Okay. And since Fitchburg is the lead agency and we're expending a lot of our resources and effort in providing the oversight, is there a preference that you can give to Fitchburg residents over a resident from other community?
Well, our sense is that because of the size of the grant and the number of units we have to outreach to, that anyone in Fitchburg who applies for this grant and who's eligible is going to receive assistance. We don't think that we're going to have a problem with more demand than supply here. And because we have the infrastructure here, we're going to be doing a lot of the marketing locally. It's going to be up to the other communities to try their own best to market the program, but I don't know how successful those efforts will be, and they have smaller populations. So I think the lion's share of the resources are going to go to Fitchburg.
Okay. Thank you.
President Hay.
Yeah, Larry, in regarding these, who's getting the funds, as you've been talking about, I understand that homeowners with kids under 6 earning less than 80%, and I know all the numbers there. When you get into the investment owners, you say they have to have tenants who are earning less than 80%. And I know there's a way for you to determine that. My question is there something that we can do to make sure that the owners are having their rents be something that somebody who's making 80% of the AMI can actually afford to live in? You know, I mean, when a Section 8 voucher holder goes out and goes to get an apartment, they have the HUD establish what's called fair market rents. And they can't rent to a landlord who is gouging or going above that. Is there anything tied into here? Or could we be giving assistance to a investment landlord who is renting to 3 families, all of them making 80% of the AMI, but he's charging them, $1,200, which is 60% of their income towards their rent?
That's
not a
an
healthy
excellent
thing
question.
for them. But I don't want to be assisting that guy.
That's an excellent question, Counselor, and because you have some prior experience in that, and because our community development block grant and home programs have requirements that we cannot cause the displacement of any existing tenants, and that they have to be able to remain in the unit after the work is done at an affordable rent. I haven't looked in the fine points of this program because it is restricted just to lead paint. It would be a little bit more difficult argument for the owner if we're paying most of the costs anyway to subsidize it, for them to raise the rent on the basis of us doing de-letting work. But I would defer to Liz if she's seen something. I would be surprised if they would allow that, but it's probably consistent with the CDBG and home programs.
We are required to engage in an agreement with the investor owner. I believe it was for 3 years afterwards that they make the unit available to families with children who earn less than 80%.
Following up on the part, Liz, where you indicated that 10% of your salary will be paid out of this and a portion of somebody else in your office, the salary. Once the grant is up, do you get a reduction of 10% in your salary? Or does the city just then assume that?
It would be an offset, Counselor. If at the end of the year, because the program has started and Liz is billing some of her time to it, there'd be a commensurate less amount of time that she would be billing against other grants and other sources, one of which is the city. So there would likely be some return of funds that were appropriated for our department by the city this past year.
And my last question is in relationship to what I spoke to before and Councilor Di Natale spoke to before. Do you know of any instance where individuals were hired for a specific amount of time to manage some type of project for the city, and then when that project was done, they've continued on as employees of the city?
I'm sure there are precedents for that, but I can't name any off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Council Beazle?
Thank you. So just following up on what Councilor President Hay had asked. So if I'm an investor and I own an apartment, I come and I say I have lead in the apartments, do we presently know, because I'm assuming if the state or federal government is supporting somebody in an apartment, they know whether or not that apartment has lead in it. Am I correct to assume that?
It's a good question for our Director of Board of Health.
I'm not quite clear of your question, Council.
Okay, so for example, if I were to apply for state funding to go into housing, would the state require that housing be checked out by the local Board of Health to see if there's any lead in it? Because as the state, I wouldn't want to be putting children in housing that may harm them somehow. So, for example, if I'm the state and I'm saying, yeah, go ahead, go to that apartment, and my kid eats lead paint and ends up, with a serious ailment. So I guess my question is, does the Board of Health regulate, or does the state have somebody go and get a permit to make sure that the children are actually moving into houses that don't have lead in them.
The state of Massachusetts has a regulation whereby property owners have to notify whether they know lead paint exists, whether they're unsure, or whether they intend to lead with every tenancy. If it's a state-funded program, it applies to them as well. However, I would venture to say most state-owned properties or state-funded properties that rent to children would be de-leaded already. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense because when I'm looking at this, so the investors that we're giving these funds to, so if I figured it out, if we did 150 units, it's $20,000 per unit is what it's going to
Properties
cost.
For well over 20 years, Counselor, the average price is well over $20,000.
Right.
Correct.
So the investors that we're funding right now, my assumption would be probably don't have children living in those units.
I think there is some stipulation in the program that within a certain amount of time that they would be required or to rent to children. I think I've seen that somewhere.
If the household is currently occupying that unit, there does need to be children there. If it's a vacant unit, they have to make it available to children after the de-leading.
Okay, and then so after 3 years, so after the 3 years is up, then they can rent to anybody they want once the 3 years is up. Okay, so in essence, then the house would be more marketable because now, so it's a good chance that you're going to see the rents go up in some of these units after 3 years.
But you're also going to see the property values increase.
Okay. So the other question I have is, we're going to be responsible for, it says the city is required by terms in order to provide a 10% match for the grant. So that's $323,000, right?
We only have to match 2.9 million in this. There's 325,000 is set aside for other hazards, and that didn't require the match. But some of it is through fringe benefits. Like, I already have my fringe benefits paid, so even though I'm 10%, I can say, oh, my 10% of my fringe benefits is now matched. And the investor owners will have to kick in some money. So that's how we intend to do match. The partner agencies are matching with their fringe benefits as well.
Okay. No, I mean, I think it's excellent that this is a health problem that, we definitely want to make sure that we're taking care of it. I just want to make sure that if we're going to invest in somebody and give them a break, that they need to turn around and give people a break that's moving into these and not just take advantage of it. Because I can see, whereas if I'm an investor right now, I'm thinking, wow, this is great. I can have the whole thing de-leaded and then after 3 years kick everyone out and rent to whoever I want, and I've saved myself some money. So I'm just hoping that, that the money, whoever we're picking to do this, that the money's going to the right people. That's all. Thank you.
Councilor Boschman.
Liz and Larry. Liz, are you going to have the time to take on this project? With all the projects that you got going on in City Hall, with the NICE program and everything else that you're doing?
My role will be mostly supervisory.
What's that? Can you speak up?
My role will be mostly supervisory. I won't be doing the day-to-day management of the program. That will be the lead program manager who will do the day-to-day management.
Okay. Now, Larry, this project in the city of Fitchburg is going to be citywide. There's not going to be Ward 5, Ward 3, Ward 2, Lower Clegon, Ward 1, Water Street to Franklin Road or something like that. It's going to be citywide.
It's going to be every board except 2. Yes, Counselor, it will be citywide.
No,
It's not area specific.
You're not going to hire the contractors to come in. You're just going to give recommendations on the contractors they should hire for de-leading? Because
Yes.
according to what I understand the law is, if you want to be a contractor, you got to have a de-leading license. Am I not right or wrong if you're doing work on your house?
For leading, you need to be licensed. You don't have to be licensed to be a contractor. To be a contractor, you only need to be lead safe. There's
Okay.
a difference.
Now, this program is nothing new because the CBG had it way back when, I remember about 25 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not a contractor, and I'm not a carpenter. But I have seen them when they come up and they butt it up and they put aluminum or vinyl over existing lead. And we called it acceptable. Now, when you have kids, and I'm not putting down kids because we all have kids, and I know what we do. Kids step on things, they break things. And you like to explore. When you see something, you start pulling it apart. And all of a sudden, now that product is get pulled apart from the existing facial covering lead. And now you're getting exposed lead. Is that the right way to go? Or should we just be ripping it out and putting new?
Unfortunately, Massachusetts lead law allows covering encapsulation as a method of de-leading. It is very common to see right now properties that were de-leaded in the 90s that have fallen out of compliance, similar to what you described. I think this program would help assist. Again, there are inspectors out daily looking for this stuff when they're doing inspections during their housing inspections. It's part of maintaining your compliance. It's part of day-to-day maintenance of being a landlord. So this program would also help those properties continue to be maintained in compliance according to lead laws.
Okay. Now, my final question, but I'm going to go back to when I remember a guy that a friend of mine owned a piece of property on Highland Ave. And I believe the Board of Health came up and inspected the property. They de-leaded the property by burning off the lead paint and scraping it off. It was all that way.
Burning is not a legal method, but scraping is.
But they was legal at that time. At that time, way back about 20 years ago.
Legal counsel, never.
Never? All right. But they did it that way, and they scraped it off. And they rented it out to kids, and something happened, and they came in and they tested it, and the wood had lead paint in it because the wood had lead paint. There was no lead paint on it.
Councilor Boschman,
What?
can we stick to the grant?
It is because I want to know if they're going to get a certificate, Counselor.
Then please ask.
That's the question I'm going to ask. If I'm an investor, which I am an investor, and I get it, the Board of Health says my house is lead free, and 5 years down the road, I took all my woodwork out and brought it down to Airport Road and have it dipped and brought it back up. There's no paint on it, so I put varnish. So Counselor on my right decides to start chewing on the wood. He comes down with lead paint. And what guarantee is that for me, or the homeowner, or the investor, or even the homeowner?
As part of issuing a certificate of lead compliance, the initial report identifying a surface that is lead will have an identification how it was de-leaded. So when an inspector goes back in there and sees such and such item was dipped and it's now peeling again, he'll know that it was dipped, or the method of compliance at that time was to be dipped. It still would need to be made intact if it were again peeling, even if it were dipped. There's still maintenance even though you dipped it.
Even though you take all the old paint
Surface will
off?
still test for lead even though you remove the paint from it.
Okay. All right.
Motion to accept 192-15.
Motion made and seconded to approve 192-15. Speaking on the motion, Councilor Tran.
Mr. Chairman, just one quick question, Larry. Can any portion of the grant be used to train Fitchburg contractors or Fitchburg employees to do lead removal?
It isn't. I don't think the funds are available for that purpose, but we do encourage contractors to get their certifications wherever possible. And I think there's some state training available for that.
The grant does include a small amount of money to do a worker de-leading training. actually one a year, both for the lead paint worker and the lead paint supervisor. So that is included. Up to 10 people each year, and the worker and the supervisor will be trained if they're interested. But we'll train up to 20 people in total.
Well, that's good.
Annually.
So do we have any interest in using that portion of money to send our employees to this training or use it for their training?
Well, this would be for lower income folks that live in Fitchburg to be trained to become workers, to then get jobs through the program, potentially through the program, because there'll be so much work to have.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily for city employees, although a city employee may qualify and be interested, but probably not for doing the course of the work that they do as a city employee now.
Okay. Thank you.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve 192-15. Further speaking on that, I am going to vote against this for the sole reason of not being clear or not being confident at this stage that this position's gone when the grant's gone. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes 4-1. Oh, 3-1, I'm sorry.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor? All those opposed? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Dad.
First the railroad, sir.
Thanks, Marcus.
I called your office early this morning. First of all, I called about 2 weeks ago.
He's a storyteller.
Oh, the guy gets sued.